obviously, I've been reading about the playbook that has been published to accelerate the development of AAV gene therapies. Great to hear about this. Now, I know that the playbook is free to access. Correct me if I'm wrong there, but
Yes,
I
that's
thought
correct.
it'd be great if we started out, if you could give a brief summary of why you're excited about the publication and what drug developers can get out of it.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is the first major deliverable of the Bespoke Gene Therapy Consortium. We launched as a public-private partnership in 2021, and the first year and a half or so was very operational within the consortium, working on selecting the clinical portfolio, which was announced in May of 2023, working on manufacturing and preclinical testing streamlining. And so this is really our first main piece that we are providing to the rare disease and gene therapy communities to help streamline their processes into the clinic. And so this first version of the Bespoke Gene Therapy Consortium regulatory playbook is mostly a compilation of existing material. So this is regulatory guidance from the US FDA, academic research that has been published by universities, clinician researchers, many of whom have worked with rare disease communities for a number of years. But it also incorporates a lot of the expertise that is available within the consortium. We've built up quite a brain trust in this public-private partnership across the entire landscape of our steering committee and our working groups and sub-teams and funded researchers. There's over 200 individuals who are contributing in some way, and many of them have had experience either as an academic clinician working with rare disease patients or in pharma and biotech companies in the regulatory process, in some cases all the way through to a BLA and a product on the market. And so what we've really wanted to make is a one-stop shop where someone who is working with an AAV gene therapy for a rare indication can go and find all of the information that they need in one place and really provide a lot of clarity and efficiency in their process as they move forward.
Yeah, I think it sounds great to have that information in one place because, like I say, there's lots of different sources where people can go for information. I think it can be confusing for drug developers.
Yeah. And not only is the information in more than one place, but sometimes it says different things. Obviously, the US regulatory guidance is the regulatory guidance, but as people have accumulated experiences in implementing that guidance, they've done so in different ways. And so finding the best way forward can sometimes be very confusing.
Great. And then, perhaps you can give some examples of some of the advice that's included in the playbook, just to give people a bit of a flavor of what's in there.
Yeah, absolutely. So much of the playbook is about the regulatory process itself. And so we have assembled information about the different types of meetings that you might have with the FDA as you're moving forward through the investigational new drug or IND process to be able to start a first-in-human clinical trial. We've assembled information about the different types of designations that are available for rare disease candidates, orphan drug status, breakthrough drug status, accelerated approvals, and how you can assemble the information necessary to qualify for one of those designations that will speed up the regulatory process for you. We've walked through the submission process and the types of documentation that are necessary. So really providing a very clear outline of what needs to be developed and submitted to the FDA at what time. We've also provided some information about how to think about designing a clinical trial for a very small patient population. So the gold standard of double-blind placebo-controlled trials just really isn't feasible for some of these very small rare disease communities. And so how do you think about how to demonstrate that your gene therapy product is safe, but also potentially effective in such a way that the FDA will accept that evidence and allow you to move forward? And then one place where the Bespoke Gene Therapy Consortium has really been an exemplar of public-private partnerships is how to engage the patient communities. And so we have done so since the first day of the consortium with patient advocacy groups on our steering committee, but also as we're developing what we call cross-functional teams for our clinical portfolio. We have patients with lived experience, caregivers who are advising those cross-functional teams as they're preparing their own documentation and processes to move forward into the clinic. And so thinking about what the best practices are in patient engagement and how you can build that into your own process as you move forward in an IND application and into the clinic as well.
Great. So obviously it sounds like, there's lots of useful stuff in there for people, which is fantastic.
Yeah.
What I also wanted to know, now obviously this is going to be a very useful resource for people. We talked about, bringing all these different documents together, but I wanted to know what inspired the creation of the playbook. What was the point where you sat down and thought, okay, this is what we need?
Yeah, so really the genesis of the playbook and really the genesis of the consortium itself was born out of the fact that the AAV gene therapy field is advancing rapidly. I think when the consortium was first thought up, there was about 200 or so IND applications at the FDA for gene therapies, many of them in the rare disease space. And there was a lack of consistency in those gene therapy applications. We saw that communities were struggling to determine the best path forward and really lacking the information that would allow the special considerations of rare disease populations to help build efficiencies into the process. So if you're following a process that's meant for multiple clinical trials of thousands of patients, and that's going to go to the market and potentially treat millions of people with that disease, it doesn't quite scale down to where you have patient populations of 100 or 50 or even 10 patients. And so we wanted to define a pathway that would be repeatable, that would allow you to leverage information, leverage processes, find standard ways to go through the preclinical testing and the regulatory submissions, and really give that pathway that allows you to get straight to the clinic as efficiently and safely as possible. And so while this first version of the playbook, again, is that compilation of publicly accessible information, it is useful in and of itself to small and large companies, to patients who are starting their own foundations and hoping to bring, a treatment for 2 or 3 patients forward, to the researchers who are working with these patient populations. But it's really only the first step. And we're really excited to be able to build this playbook out over the next several years. And one of the ways that we're going to do that is through our clinical portfolio. So we have 8 diseases that were selected last year as proof of concept studies, essentially. And they span multiple different types of diseases. We have ocular diseases, we have neurological diseases, we have diseases that affect the entire body systemically, different routes of administration that are associated with those potential therapies, different AAV serotypes, so selecting different delivery models within that AAV space. And we are in the process of defining and then validating through that clinical portfolio some standard sets of protocols that we hope will be repeatable even outside of the clinical portfolio of the BGTC. So the first thing that we did was assemble our wonderful team of manufacturing experts to align on critical quality attributes. What needs to be tested in the product after it's manufactured in order to continue to move forward with that. And so we have developed a standardized list that we're going to propose to use in all of our BGTC product that defines the critical quality attributes that are necessary, as well as the methodology for testing them and the acceptance criteria. And this will be extremely useful to a number of communities across the entire AAV gene therapy and rare disease space, because it will tell them exactly what they need to measure and how they need to measure it. So that they don't have to go back and repeat testing or do something that isn't maybe as necessary in order to demonstrate that your product is what you have characterized it as. And then the second step that we have done is aligned on preclinical testing protocols. And in this case, we have 3 preclinical testing protocols that we'll be proposing, one for each of the different routes of administration that are reflected in the BGTC's clinical portfolio. And so here we're trying to define what types of tests are required versus what might be able to be submitted as a supplemental in your IND application. When you might be able to safely consider the use of smaller animal models and not using non-human primates, which can provide cost efficiencies, can also potentially speed the process up if you're having trouble sourcing non-human primates. What types of testing, how many animals are necessary in these preclinical tests? And so really developing that roadmap that is then submitted to the FDA in a handful of AAV gene therapies for rare diseases through the clinical portfolio and pressure tested through the process. Once we have some successful IND applications, we'll be able to release that information to the public through the next version of the playbook, so that they can then repeat those processes in their own AAV gene therapies. And then the last thing that we're doing, and this is really why a public-private partnership was so necessary, is that we'll also be releasing our regulatory information, the documentation, correspondence with the FDA, templates, and as much of the IND applications themselves that we can release to the public. And we can do that because the National Center for Advancing Translational Sciences, NCATS, is the sponsor of these trials. So it takes the commercial element out of it. These are all very rare diseases that currently don't have any commercial interest, which is one of the requirements that we were looking for when we were selecting the diseases. And we did that so that we would be able to make all of this information publicly available after we had gone through our own processes. And so people will be able to follow the critical quality attribute testing. They'll be able to follow the preclinical testing protocols. They'll be able to prepare all of their documentation in a standard format and submit that to the FDA for their own application, and hopefully accelerate that process and bring therapies to patients faster.
Right. I think that sounds so available that people are going to have the data they can follow along with. Because it's one thing having the regulations, but it's another thing to actually see how they were used and what exactly people did. Because I think some smaller companies, some inexperienced companies can look at the guidelines and actually be very confused very quickly. So to have those examples in the public domain is fantastic.
Absolutely. It's going to be a game changer for small companies and startups in this space who might be at the very beginning of their regulatory journey. It's going to ease the process for researchers who want to help the patient populations that they've been studying, perhaps in natural history studies over time. And we have examples even of very determined parents who have started their own foundations and taken on this process and had this enormous questionable landscape out in front of them of how do I move through this to bring a therapy to my child or to these handful of children, and really giving them the tools and resources that would be needed to move through that process as well.
You know, and I can see from the playbook that a lot of people have been involved in putting this together. A lot of work has gone into it. Why did so many people need to be involved? And I guess the bigger question is, what were the biggest challenges of working with so many different perspectives? You've got a lot of different people to please and a lot of different opinions.
Yes, one of the things that we learned is that discussions took much longer than we thought they would, because there was just so much information, so many different resources and perspectives, that we moved through the consortium a little bit slower than we had initially planned. But I think what the result of that was some really robust and really well thought out products. We had the opportunity as a stakeholder group to have some informal, non-binding conversations with the FDA early on in the process to present our CQA strategy and say, you know, is there anything that we're missing? Is there anything that we should be thinking of that we haven't thought of? Similarly, with our preclinical testing protocols, even before we contemplated including them in an application or a pre-IND meeting, we were able to have some conversations with some subject matter experts at CBER, the Center for Biologics Evaluation and Research, to get their perspectives, in addition to the perspectives of our industry representatives, of our researchers at the NIH, and some of our outside subject matter experts. So it really just is so much information and so much wealth of experience, of knowledge, of perspectives, that I think that even though it was a little bit more of a journey than we expected, it made the product that much better coming out of those very lengthy and robust discussions.
I think it's going to be interesting to obviously see how the industry reacts to the playbook, how people use it, and what kind of projects it, I guess, you know, empowers going forward. So really great thing. I think a lot of people watching this will be downloading it, taking a look. Before we finish up, I wanted to also ask for some of your views more broadly on the gene therapy industry. You know, it's a really challenging area to work in, and I wanted to ask you what do you see as, I guess, the biggest hurdles to accelerating the development of therapies that hopefully this playbook can help with as well?
Yeah, we've seen that manufacturing is really a challenge. And so while we had hoped to be able to transform that space a little bit more, just because of the realities of time and logistics, while we're standardizing the critical quality attributes and processes, in this iteration of the consortium, we weren't able to standardize the manufacturing. What we've been able to do, though, is leverage processes. So when we were identifying manufacturers for our BGTC product to go into our IND applications and clinical trials, we sought to pair those indications with manufacturers that already had experience in that particular AAV serotype, in that particular route of administration. In some cases, very similar diseases that they had already put forward things into INDs or even products on the market, so that they could not start from scratch, but they could repeat those processes that they had already developed. Unfortunately, what that means, though, is that the manufacturing piece will still have to be submitted privately through a drug master file to the FDA. In parallel, though, it won't affect this iteration of the consortium, which is structured to run through 2027. But we do have some work being done within the consortium to develop a more standardized manufacturing platform for AAV gene therapies. And we hope that that will help inform future consortiums and really allow the rare disease community to have a standard open source way to access manufacturing capabilities. I think, though, that the other thing that we've seen is that the field is growing. There are more indications that are potentially being investigated for therapies, and the FDA is still catching up. I was really encouraged to see the restructuring announcement into the Super Center last year at the FDA, and hiring additional FDA staff to help guide and process all of these applications. The pilot programs that they're running for the pre-IND meetings, the platform designation that was announced last year. We're still waiting to see what exactly that means for the rare disease community, but very encouraged to see that the FDA is starting to think about these unique aspects of the rare disease community and how they can adapt their regulatory processes to help better serve those communities while still ensuring that safety is of the utmost priority as the therapies are moving forward. And then I'm also really excited about the accelerated approvals process and how that might be paired with a gene therapy to use a surrogate endpoint to be able to get something to the market faster and bring these gene therapies to the patients.
Yeah, it's very exciting to hear that from regulators as well, that they're getting involved in pilot programs. I think moves to standardized manufacturing sound fantastic as well.
Yeah.
I think a lot of companies will be interested in that.
Yeah.
Are there any other recent developments in AAV gene therapy, whether in science or manufacturing? Is there anything else that you're particularly excited by in the area?
Well, actually, I'm also really excited to see what might come out of some of the other viral or non-viral delivery opportunities. When the Bespoke Gene Therapy Consortium was first thought up in 2019, AAV was chosen as the focus area for a couple of reasons. One was that it offered the best known safety profile, dosing ranges, characterization, and so forth. It also offered us the most freedom to operate in a pre-competitive space because the wild type vector were either not under patent or were very easily licensable. But since then, we have seen enormous strides in other viral vectors, in non-viral delivery technologies, and those could potentially become more feasible for the rare disease community than some of the challenges associated with AAV vector manufacturing and characterization. And so while we are exclusively focused on AAV gene replacement therapy in this consortium, I think that there is a lot of opportunity coming in the future for us to potentially replicate the Bespoke Gene Therapy Consortium in a different delivery model, whether it's another viral vector or if it's lipid nanoparticles or some other non-viral delivery system, or gene editing modalities that may be able to be a little bit more within reach just from a manufacturing and technical perspective for some of these diseases.
And then, as we look to the future, obviously, you know, there's a lot of new developments happening. Like I said, gene editing has become a big one in the last few months. What challenges do you think the industry will still need to address in the future?
Yeah, I still think that they're going to need to align on standard processes. I worry that if we don't get out in front of that, then we'll end up in the same landscape as we have with the AAV gene therapies, where there are so many different manufacturing technologies that are proprietary to different organizations, that there are variations in the testing that goes into the IND applications. I think that we have a real opportunity in front of us to kind of get out in front of some of that, and start to develop more standards and more processes that can be shared amongst the communities earlier on, so that we don't have to go back and reinvent things after they're already kind of down the road a little bit. And so I think the timing of the Bespoke Gene Therapy Consortium is just a really great opportunity to model for the communities that we can come together in the pre-competitive space, that we can bring dozens of companies and nonprofit organizations together to the table to all work towards a common goal of aligning on the best ways to move forward in these spaces, all with the shared goal of getting things to patients in need.
Mm-hmm. And thank you so much for sharing your experience and your knowledge of the project there. Just before we finish up this interview, is there anything else you want to tell us about the playbook or the consortium?
Yeah, one thing that we just really try to stress is that while we have 8 diseases in our clinical portfolio, this consortium would not consider ourselves a success if we only treated those 8 diseases, only had within some hopefully successful clinical trials 50 or 60 patients who received therapies. It's really about modeling and validating the processes that could potentially bring hope to millions of patients with thousands of rare diseases that could be treated by an AAV gene therapy. And so we know that we wanted to do more. We included as much as we possibly could within the timing and resources that we had available. But we really want the rare disease communities to know that everything we do, we hope will benefit their patients and their rare diseases as well.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for talking to us today. And for everyone watching this, I'll include a link to the playbook in the links for the video.
Thank you so much.